in this crooked game of power politics here in America, the Negro, namely the race problem, integration, civil rights issue, are all nothing but tools used by the whites who call themselves liberals against another group of whites who call themselves conservatives, either to get into power or to retain power. Among whites here in America, the political teams are no longer divided into Democrats and Republicans. The whites who are now struggling for control of the American political throne are divided into liberal and conservative camps. The white liberals from both parties cross party lines to work together toward the same goal, and white conservatives from both parties do likewise. The white liberal differs from the white conservative only in one way. The liberal is more deceitful, more hypocritical than the conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor. And by winning the friendship and support of the Negro, the white liberal is able to use the Negro as a pawn or a weapon in this political football game that is constantly raging between the white liberals and the white conservatives. The American Negro is nothing but a political football, and the white liberals control this ball through tricks or tokenism, false promises of integration and civil rights. In this game of deceiving and using the American Negro, the white liberals have complete cooperation of the Negro civil rights leaders, who sell our people out for a few crumbs of token recognition, token gains, token progress.
I just told you a little while ago, these leaders that they call leaders, this included Lena Horne, this included Dick Gregory, and this included comedians, comics, trumpet players, baseball players. Show me in the white community where a comedian is a white leader. Show me in the white community where a singer is a white leader, or a dancer or a trumpet player is a white leader. These aren't leaders. These are puppets and clowns that have been set up over the white community and over the black community by the white community, and have been made celebrities and usually say exactly what they know that the white man wants to hear.
In the Political Science Quarterly, Louise Bowles wrote that the almost total absorption of the black vote within the Democratic fold was a relatively recent phenomenon. The black political realignment began in the 1930s with the New Deal policies of Franklin Delano Roosevelt and was not effectively consolidated until the 1960s. According to history, the New Deal was a series of programs and projects instituted during the Great Depression by President FDR that aimed to restore prosperity to Americans. In 1935, FDR signed the Social Security Act, which established 2 social insurance programs on a national scale to help meet the risks of old age and unemployment, which includes what the Social Security Administration calls unemployment compensation. Interestingly enough, the word compensation was used because there had been some question of constitutionality in case the word insurance was used. According to history, New Deal policies drew arguments that they represented an unconstitutional extension of federal authority. The conservative majority on the Supreme Court had already invalidated reform initiatives like the National Recovery Administration and the Agricultural Adjustment Administration. Discourse on both sides of the political spectrum can argue whether these New Deal policies were net negative or net positive for society as a whole, or whether these policies were constitutional in the first place. But the most important thing that these policies did, which pertains to this video, was draw a lot of black Republicans to the Democratic Party. President Herbert Hoover exacerbated the Great Depression by signing the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Act, which implemented protectionist trade policies in the United States. His policies and programs to combat the Great Depression, which mostly centered around the creation of new jobs, couldn't keep up with nationwide layoffs due to less consumer spending. According to the Herbert Hoover Presidential Library and Museum, Hoover was criticized for almost every program he proposed. They were viewed as callous disregard for the unemployed. The Library of Congress wrote that by 1932, approximately half of African Americans were out of work. In some northern cities, whites even called for African Americans to be fired from any jobs as long as there were whites out of work as well. Herbert Hoover gave FDR such an alley-oop that all he had to do was entertain black visitors to the White House and pander to the poor and unemployed. Roosevelt won by a landslide. Unfortunately, even FDR's New Deal policies affected the races differently. The 1935 Act limited its provisions to workers in commerce and industry. This meant that the new social insurance program applied to about half the jobs in the economy. Among those left out were farm and domestic workers, two industries that were disproportionately occupied by black people, according to the Social Security Administration themselves. However, Larry DeWitt, public historian for the Social Security Administration, found that this was purely coincidence and had no basis in racism. Arthur Works Mitchell became the first African-American Democrat elected to Congress, part of the New Deal coalition. He was a Republican turned Democrat. Mitchell was able to redeem his reputation after charges of financial fraud, somewhat as a leading campaigner for FDR, according to the Encyclopedia of Alabama. A little backstory on Mitchell. Around 1903, he established a vocational elementary school for African American children in Greensboro, Hale County, that he named West Alabama Normal and Industrial Institute. The financing came from a combination of funds from local residents and Mitchell solicited support from several northern philanthropists who had contributed to Tuskegee. The school closed after 5 years and Mitchell moved to Birmingham, where he turned to buying and selling real estate. Soon after, Mitchell moved to Sumter County to take advantage of an opportunity to partner with the white owner of Fair Oaks Plantation between rural communities of Gainesville and Panola. The two men established the African American Building Loan and Real Estate Company and reopened the West Alabama Normal and Industrial Institute on October 28, 1908. The school was in reality a scheme to attract poor blacks to farms and woodlots in need of cheap labor. The two-story frame structure was surrounded by a large garden plot, planted and tended by students ranging from ages 7 to 16. It was staffed by Mitchell, his wife, and at least one other teacher. The academy received mixed reviews from pupils and their parents. Children gained only some rudimentary lessons in both classroom and field work, and their parents learned advanced agricultural practices at school-sponsored institutes. Through mailed solicitations, as well as personal appearances before northern philanthropic groups, Mitchell siphoned funds away from the more established Tuskegee. Initially, Mitchell joined the Republican Party as early as 1928. However, after realizing that it would be impossible for him to become prominent in the party, he quickly decided that the Democratic Party offered better opportunities, given its scarcity of black members and candidates. According to the encyclopedia, he received backing from Chicago's powerful Democratic political machine, and his candidacy was buoyed by FDR's popularity that year. These factors, along with solid white support, were enough for Mitchell to overcome African-American Republican incumbent Oscar De Priest's popularity among black constituents and score an upset victory. Side note, the first black Republican, Hiram Rhodes Revels, was voted into Congress in 1870. To prepare him for service in Washington, D.C., Cook County Democratic Party head Patrick J. Nash instructed Mitchell to fully support passage of Roosevelt's New Deal Reconstruction programs. Mitchell thus distanced himself from the NAACP on anti-lynching and other issues deemed offensive to congressmen from southern states. Mitchell proved to be valuable in recruiting blacks from the Republican Party to the Democratic Party through his leadership of the DNC's colored division in the West during the 1932 and 1936 presidential campaigns. In each state, Mitchell hired and supervised African American workers to campaign for Roosevelt among black voters. He spanned the nation during both elections, speaking favorably of Roosevelt and of the New Deal accomplishments on behalf of African Americans.
I just told you a little while ago, these leaders.
However, FDR's New Deal policies came with criticisms beyond constitutional legality. With the Social Security Act of 1935, the aid to families with dependent children was established as a grant program to enable states to provide cash welfare payments for needy children who had been deprived of parental support or care because their father or mother was absent from the home, incapacitated, deceased, or unemployed. All 50 states, the District of Columbia, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Virgin Islands operated an AFDC program. The states define the need, set their own benefit levels, establish income and resource limits, and administer the program or supervise its administration. States were entitled to unlimited federal funds for reimbursement of benefit payments at matching rates that were inversely related to state per capita income. States were required to provide aid to all persons who were in classes eligible under federal law and whose income and resources were within state set limits, according to the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. Before 1968, a lot of states enacted a man-in-the-house rule, which meant a child who otherwise qualified for welfare benefits was denied those benefits if the child's mother was living with or having relations with any single or married able-bodied male. The man was considered a substitute father even if the man was not supporting the child. However, the Supreme Court struck down this rule in the case of King v. Smith, which allowed families with males in the household to be eligible for benefits if they were not deemed actual or substitute parents, although any financial contribution on the part of the male to the family was still considered a part of the family's total income. The foundations of the modern welfare state began with FDR's New Deal policies. The expectation of the government taking initiative to protect the health and well-being of its citizens, especially those in financial or social need, by means of grants, pensions, and other benefits, solidified itself with welfare policies, public housing policies, social security policies, and more. These expectations, among other factors that need its own video, festered into a culture of dependency and victimhood, effectively turning self-capable, self-determined adults into pseudo-children that need their hands held by the federal government. The Great Depression created a vacuum that allowed FDR to rise to power through the subjugation of poor people with the promise of free money and housing, just as long as they supported him and remained poor. Some people could argue that FDR's welfare policies could be viewed as what some people might call reparations, but only reparations that could be exploited to its maximum benefit if you have a lot of children and remain a single parent. FDR's rise to the presidency ended the chokehold of Republican dominance and shifted the ethos and philosophy of the Democratic Party as a whole. FDR appointed his campaign manager, James Farley, as chairman of the Democratic National Committee, which likely helped him maintain power for 12 years. But his landslide presidential win couldn't have been done without the help of Arthur Works Mitchell, the puppet implemented by who Malcolm X called
the white liberal.
These puppets are treated as leaders and saviors for the community, implementing these unappointed leaders into black communities, sometimes being bold enough to implement a white liberal leader, perpetuates the concept of infantilizing said community. These unappointed leaders pander with false promises of real reparations like Jews received from Germany. They speak to us like we're uneducated, unassimilated, using grammatically incorrect English deemed ebonics by a puppet leader propped up by the white liberal.
I don't feel no ways tired.
Proud to be a bartender. Ain't nothing wrong with that.
Dr. Robert Williams rose to prominence by coining the term ebonics, which was a mix between ebony and phonics. He argued against the IQ test due to its perceived implicit bias. He created his own intelligence test called the Black Intelligence Test of Cultural Homogeneity, also known as Bitch 100 or the Bitch Test. Sometimes the jokes just write themselves. The test consisted of a multiple choice questionnaire in which the examinee was asked to identify the meaning of 100 words as they were then used in black ghettos. Examples of words included alley apple, black draught, blood, boogie joogie, and boot, and a 100-question multiple choice test to gauge IQ, which Williams called a culturally fair test. He concluded that black students did much better on this black intelligence test than white students, as opposed to white students doing much better on conventional tests than black students. A quote by Booker T. Washington reads, "There is a certain class of race problem solvers who don't want the patient to get well because as long as the disease holds out, they have not only an easy means to make a living, but also an easy medium through which to make themselves prominent before the public." I don't know any credible institution that uses the bitch test to measure IQ. Robert Williams went on to further divide blacks from whites while simultaneously, maybe unconsciously, perpetuating the idea that blacks are incapable, unresilient, and unable to adapt by shilling ideas that the black personality could not be understood using European philosophy and values, and must be understood by drawing on African philosophy of collectivism, diametrically opposed to Western individualism. Williams also argued that white children acquire racist predispositions at a young age through the process of racial scripting, which are taught to children by parents, schools, religious groups, etc. These racial scripts garner stereotypes that he argues against, such as the failing black family, among others. For Williams to argue against things like the failing black family completely absolves accountability and ignores reality. A study of 1880 family structures in Philadelphia showed that 3/4 of black families were nuclear families, composed of 2 parents and children. Data from U.S. Census reports reveal that between 1880 and 1960, married households consisting of 2-parent homes were the most widespread form of African American family structures. Although the most popular married households decreased over this time period, single-parent homes, on the other hand, remained relatively stable until 1960, when they dramatically rose. According to the Brookings Institute, an American think tank, since 1970, out-of-wedlock birth rates have soared. In 1965, 24% of black infants and 31% of white infants were born to single mothers. By 1990, the rates had risen to 64% for black infants, 18% for whites. Every year, about 1 million more children are born into fatherless families. A study in the National Library of Medicine found that children raised in single-mother families are at an increased risk for psychopathology. Single mothers were more likely to engage in psychologically controlling behaviors, which predicted their adolescent offspring experiencing higher rates of depressive symptoms and externalizing disorders. Furthermore, girls were more susceptible to depressive symptoms via psychologically controlling parenting than boys in single-mother families. Single mothers were more likely to engage in rejecting parenting behaviors, which predicted a higher prevalence of adolescent externalizing disorders. Finally, low socioeconomic status was associated with single motherhood and negative parenting behaviors. CNN reported that the typical black American family is virtually no closer to equal footing with its white peers in terms of income and wealth than it was 50 years ago, when the Civil Rights era reforms were enacted to expand opportunity and limit outright racial discrimination. These policies and government assistance championed to not only help but improve the black community have been a net negative. And the more the government intervenes with black liberty, the more detriment it's going to have on the community as a whole. These policies don't improve communities in the long run, they stagnate or regress them. And the more the black community stagnates or regresses, the more vacuums will be created for unappointed leaders to diagnose and prescribe what they think is best for blacks.
Black people in the U.S. On average perform lower in math classrooms.
Yes.
Like perform worse. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So like, how do we improve that?
My guess is there's going to be a lot of socioeconomic conditions that are hampering a student's ability to learn. So coming from a single parent household, yeah.
I agree with all that, of course.
Uh-huh.
How does a math teacher, a specific math teacher who has like a class full of like mostly black students or even a few black students, how would they, or even just a few students of color, like how would they engage with this?
The exact same way they'd engage with a classroom full, the exact same way they'd engage with a classroom full of very poor white students.
Booker T. Washington once said, "The wisest among my race understand that agitations of social equality is the extremest folly, and that the progress and the enjoyment of all privileges that will come to us must be the result of severe and constant struggle rather than of artificial forcing. Wealth, success, and true freedom is cultivated through hard work, discipline, and delayed gratification, not government assistance. Government assistance is keeping the black community docile and in a perpetual state of infantilization, where we are treated as a community who are less capable and are always going to need some external help to improve, like a child."